Ah, yes. Let me tell you about the day the Velthari Dominion decided to make an example out of a backwater star system called Kepler 7-9er. You know how empires work, right? You pick the weakest-looking colony. You send an overwhelming fleet. You reduce it to glowing rubble, and everyone else in the sector suddenly remembers to pay their tribute on time. It is a classic move, elegant even. The Dominion had done it 43 times across 6 centuries. 43 times it had worked perfectly. This was going to be 44, or so Fleet Commander Vaskai believed, sitting in the command throne of the dreadnought Unbroken Mandate, watching his tactical display light up with the pale blue signatures of 17 Velthari warships sliding out of fold space in perfect formation. 17 ships, against one under-defended mining colony with 3 orbital platforms and, according to Dominion intelligence, absolutely no military backup within 40 light-years. The math was not complicated. Even Vaskai's least mathematically gifted subordinate could have worked it out. The colony in question was called Crestfall Station, and it belonged to a species the Dominion had only recently catalogued. A bipedal, medium-sized, embarrassingly fragile-looking species called humans. They had been in this particular system for about 60 years. They had dug some very impressive holes in the third moon. They had built a refinery that processed a mineral the Dominion found moderately useful. And they had, according to all available intelligence, sent exactly 0 distress calls before Vaskai's fleet arrived, because they had detected the fold space signatures 6 hours prior and apparently decided that calling for help was pointless. Vaskai found that detail charming. A species with enough sense to know when it was beaten. That would make the surrender go quickly. He was hoping to be done by mid-cycle. The communications officer, a young Velthari named Preth, opened a channel to the colony the moment they dropped out of fold space. Standard procedure. Offer terms, demand compliance, give them 20 minutes to think about it while looking at 17 capital ships hanging over their heads. Vaskai leaned back and waited. What came back was not a surrender. The voice was human, unhurried, with an accent that the translator rendered as dry and slightly amused. Velthari Fleet. This is Administrator Yolanda Ferris of Crestfall Station. I've received your terms. I'm going to need you to hold on for about 6 hours, maybe 7. We're a little busy right now. Vaskai stared at the communication channel. His tactical officer, Commander Sert, turned from her console with an expression that, in Velthari terms, roughly translated to, "Did I just hear that correctly?" They said, "Hold on," Preth confirmed, equally bewildered. "I understood what they said," Vaskai replied. He opened the channel himself. Administrator Ferris, you are facing 17 Dominion warships. I would strongly suggest that busy is not a status you can afford to maintain. Oh, I completely agree, Ferris said pleasantly. But we've only got the one docking bay running at full capacity right now, and it's going to take time. Look, Commander, you seem like a reasonable person. You've got 17 ships. We're not going anywhere, can we say? 6 hours? I'll have tea on. Vaskai did not know what tea was. He also did not know what docking bay she was referring to, because his sensors showed Crestfall Station's docking infrastructure as largely dormant. Minimal power signatures, no launch activity, nothing incoming on any approach vector. He gave them the 6 hours. Not because he was charmed by the audacity, though he was a little. He gave them the 6 hours because 17 warships were not going anywhere either, and if the humans wanted to spend their last hours of independence doing something puzzling, that was their business. What happened in those 6 hours would later be classified by the Velthari Dominion's Intelligence Division as the Crestfall Incident, filed under a category that had previously been empty, labeled in rough translation as situations we did not adequately model. 2 hours in, Preth noticed something. Commander, I'm reading. Fold space disturbances. Multiple. Beyond the system's outer marker. Vaskai glanced at the display. Survey ships, probably. The humans must have sent runners before we arrived. The signatures are large, sir. Large survey ships, then. Very large, sir. Seret had moved to the sensor array personally now, her four-fingered hands working the console with the focused energy of someone who has noticed something that does not fit any existing mental category. "Commander," she said, very carefully, "these are not survey ships." The fold space readings were blooming across the outer system like flowers opening in time-lapse. 1, 3, 7, 11, 15, 20, 26. The counter kept climbing, each signature sharp and massive, each one dragging behind it a gravitational shadow that told Vaskai's sensors exactly what class of vessel was punching through into his system. Capital ships. Human capital ships. 31 of them. Vaskai stood up from the command throne. He was not a being who stood up suddenly. He had held this rank for 20 years and had cultivated a reputation for unshakable composure that was frankly legendary in the Dominion's officer corps. He stood up. "Get me a vessel classification," he said, and was quietly proud that his voice did not crack. The classification came back in pieces, because Dominion intelligence had human vessels catalogued in a somewhat theoretical sense. They had observed them from a distance, noted the general scale, logged some energy readings during the humans' recent border skirmishes with the Keth Collective, and then filed it all under Monitor for Future Assessment. What came back from Sarit's console was a mixture of confirmed readings and estimated classifications, and all of it was bad. The humans had not sent colony defenders. They had sent their war fleet, 31 vessels ranging from heavy cruisers to something at the center of the formation that Vaskai's sensors classified, after a long and clearly baffled pause, as a ship class that did not exist in the Dominion's registry. It was big enough that the registry's first attempt was to classify it as a space station that had somehow learned to move. It was called, and Vaskai's translator offered this with the particular hesitancy of a system encountering a word it found philosophically uncomfortable, the ISV unconditional argument. The humans had named their flagship after the concept of winning a debate by being physically enormous. Vaskai found that, in some distant and horrified part of his mind, deeply funny. Administrator Ferris's voice came back on the channel, still unhurried. "Velthari Fleet, this is Crestfall Station again. Sorry for the wait. Our reinforcements have arrived. I believe you'll be speaking to Admiral Priya Sundaram from this point forward. She's much better at the diplomatic side of things than I am. Honestly, I mostly do mining logistics, so..." A pause. "Tea's ready if anyone changes their mind." The channel shifted. The new voice was different, precise and level, the translator rendering it with a clipped efficiency that Vaskai associated with senior military personnel across every species he had ever encountered. They all sounded like that, at a certain point. Like people who had stopped being surprised by things. "Fleet Commander Vaskai. I'm Admiral Sundaram, commanding the 6th and 9th response groups out of Kepler Command. I'll be brief. You have approximately 11 minutes to begin withdrawal before my weapons officers start asking me interesting questions about targeting solutions. I'd rather not answer those questions today. I've got paperwork." Vaskai looked at his tactical display. 17 Velthari warships, 31 human vessels, with a flagship that his sensors were now estimating at nearly 3 times the mass of his own dreadnought, which had always been, until this moment, an impressive ship. "Admiral Sundaram," he said slowly, "we had intelligence indicating no response capability within 40 light-years." "Yes," Sundaram said. "You did." The silence that followed that statement was the most informative silence Vaskai had ever experienced. He looked at Sert. Sert looked back at him with the expression of someone quietly reassessing several foundational assumptions about the universe. He looked at Preth, who had gone a shade paler than usual, and was staring at the fold space readings, as if hoping they would change. 31 ships. 40 light-years, covered in 6 hours. The Velthari's fastest warships could do 40 light-years in roughly 30 hours if they pushed the fold drives hard enough to need a week of maintenance afterward. These humans had done it in 6, which meant either the intelligence about their drive technology was wrong, comprehensively, catastrophically wrong, Or these ships had been moving before Vaskai's fleet had even arrived in system. You knew we were coming, Vaskai said. Fleet Commander, Sundaram said, with the particular patience of someone explaining something to a person who has just caught up. We've known about Dominion expansion doctrine for 4 years. We've had 3 response groups pre-positioned along the most probable approach vectors for 14 months. Crestfall Station was not undefended. Crestfall Station was bait. Another pause. A very nice bait, I should say. Administrator Ferris runs an excellent operation. From somewhere in the background of the transmission, Vaskai heard a faint, cheerful "Thank you, Admiral." He sat back down in the command throne. Slowly, with great deliberateness. Because if he was going to be humiliated across an open channel in front of his entire crew, he was going to be humiliated with good posture. 17 ships. 31. Numbers were very simple things. He had always found comfort in that. My orders, he said, did not include provisions for this scenario. No, Sundaram agreed. I imagine they didn't. He thought about the 43 times the Dominion's strategy had worked. The formula that had never failed. The intelligence assessments that had described humans as a mid-development species with limited military reach, fragile biology, and no meaningful power projection capability beyond their own border systems. Someone in the intelligence division, Vaskai reflected, was going to have an extremely unpleasant career review. I'll need to contact my admiralty, he said. Of course, I'll give you 20 minutes. Another pause. That's what you give colonies before demanding surrender, isn't it? 20 minutes? Seemed fair. The 20 minutes Sundaram gave him felt nothing like the 20 minutes Vaskai routinely gave terrified colonies. Those 20 minutes were heavy, oppressive things, designed to let the reality of overwhelming force settle into the bones of whoever was on the receiving end. These 20 minutes were somehow worse. They had the texture of courtesy, which was, in Vaskai's experience, the most unsettling thing an opponent could offer. He spent 12 of them on a tight beam channel to Dominion Admiralty Command, speaking to a very senior official named High Admiral Torvin Koss, who listened to Vaskai's situation report with the stillness of a being who was rapidly reclassifying his afternoon from routine to catastrophic. 31 vessels, Koss said when Vaskai finished. 31 confirmed, sir. Possibly more holding at the outer system boundary. Our sensors are having difficulty with their stealth signatures. He paused. They have stealth signatures, sir. Our intelligence files did not mention stealth signatures. There was a long silence from Admiralty Command. The kind of silence that precedes a very significant reallocation of resources and a very uncomfortable series of meetings. The flagship, Koss said. The one your registry couldn't classify. The unconditional argument, sir. Yes, another silence. That is what they named it. Our translator was fairly confident, sir. Torvin Koss had commanded fleets, negotiated treaties, and survived 4 internal Dominion political purges through a combination of tactical genius and an almost supernatural instinct for knowing when a situation had moved beyond the point where stubbornness was useful. That instinct was speaking to him very clearly right now. Begin withdrawal, he said. Do not fire. Do not posture. Begin withdrawal, and do it in a way that does not look like fleeing. With respect, sir, I'm not certain those two things are compatible given the current geometry. Then pick the one that keeps my ships intact, Fleet Commander. The channel closed. Vaskai opened the line to Admiral Sundaram with 3 minutes to spare, because he was, whatever else could be said about this day, a punctual being. Admiral, we will be withdrawing from this system. I would ask that your forces hold position during our departure. Already planned for it, Sundaram said. My navigation officer, Lieutenant Beckley, has logged your likely exit vectors. We'll give you a clean corridor. No pursuit. Vaskai processed that. You've already plotted our withdrawal routes. We've been watching your fleet formations since you arrived, Fleet Commander. Your fold drive charging signatures are pretty readable at this range. We knew you'd picked a standard 3-point exit pattern about 40 minutes ago. He looked at Sert, who was looking at her console with the expression of someone who has discovered that they have been transparent in a way they did not realize was possible. She mouthed something at him. It looked like 40 minutes. I see, Vaskai said. Safe travels, Sundaram said. And please pass along to your admiralty. Next time, send a diplomat first. It's considerably cheaper. The withdrawal took 40 minutes to execute and was conducted with the careful, deliberate precision of 17 crews who were all acutely aware that 31 human warships were watching every move. Nobody fired. Nobody made any sudden gestures. The Velthari fleet folded out of Kepler 79er's system one by one, like guests quietly leaving a party that had gone in an unexpected direction. The last ship out was Vaskai's own. He watched Crestfall Station on his rear sensors until the fold transition took it, a small cluster of lights against a brown moon, unremarkable, modest, producing minerals that were only moderately useful. A mining colony, a perfectly ordinary mining colony, sitting in the middle of a trap that had been waiting, patient and silent, for 14 months. Then the fold took everything, and he was somewhere else, and the whole incident was officially someone else's problem. On Crestfall Station, Administrator Yolanda Ferris watched the last Velthari fold signature collapse on her display with the particular satisfaction of someone who has pulled off something complicated without spilling anything on themselves. She was 53 years old, had been running mining operations for 22 of those years, and had agreed to the strategic positioning arrangement with Kepler Command 18 months ago because a Defense Ministry official named Captain Ose Tamboli had sat in her office and explained, very politely, that Crestfall was on a likely approach vector, and would she mind terribly if they used it. She had said yes mostly because it had seemed rude to say no, and also because they had offered to upgrade the station's water recycling systems, which had been a persistent headache for years. The recycling systems were, she reflected, excellent now. She poured herself tea, actual tea, brewed from a plant her grandmother had insisted on growing in the station's hydroponics bay because some things were non-negotiable, and opened a channel to the unconditional argument. Admiral Sundaram, they're gone. I see that. There was something in Sundaram's voice that Ferris had come to recognize over 18 months of occasional communications, a restrained amusement, professional and dry. Good work, Administrator. You managed 6 hours of delay with what sounded like a conversation about scheduling. I have 240 staff and a mining operation to protect, Ferris said. I can be very creative about scheduling when motivated. I'm putting that in my report. Please don't. Sundaram laughed, an actual laugh, brief and genuine. The response groups are going to hold position for another 72 hours, then rotate back to their pre-positioning coordinates. You might see some crew shuttles if anyone needs resupply. Lieutenant Beekle tells me he has family somewhere in your residential block, so there may be a personal visit. Ferris smiled. Tell him we've still got his grandmother's recipe for jollof rice in the station cookbook. The real one, not the version she told other people. A pause. I'll tell him. He'll be unreasonably emotional about that. The channel closed, and Ferris sat alone in her office for a moment, listening to the station hum around her, the deep mechanical breathing of a place that drilled and processed and sorted, that had been doing so for 60 years, that would be doing so long after this particular afternoon became a footnote in somebody's strategic assessment document. Through the observation port, the brown moon turned slowly, enormous and patient, indifferent to fleets and politics and the delicate geometry of deterrence. Her deputy, a young man named Rufus Achterberg, who had been on Crestfall for 3 years and still found most things more alarming than Ferris did, appeared in the doorway. He had the look of someone who had been holding a question for 6 hours and could no longer physically contain it. Are we okay? He said. We are, Ferris said. Absolutely fine. There were 17 warships. There were, she agreed. And then, there were 31 warships. Rufus looked at her with the desperate energy of a person needing a complete explanation. Did you know? The whole time? Ferris considered this. I knew we had an arrangement with Kepler Command. I knew there were response groups pre-positioned. I did not know exactly how many ships, or that the response time would be that fast, or that the flagship would be called the Unconditional Argument, which I genuinely did not expect. The Unconditional Argument, Rufus repeated. Apparently the crew voted on the name. He sat down in the chair across from her desk. He was quiet for a moment, processing. Fleet Commander Vaskai must have been having a very bad day. I imagine, Ferris said, that today gave Fleet Commander Vaskai a great deal to think about. 17 light-years away, at the edge of Dominion space, Fleet Commander Orith Vaskai was indeed thinking. He was thinking in the particular way of someone who has spent a 20-year career building expertise in a subject and has just been confronted with evidence that the subject has changed significantly without informing him. He was going through the intelligence files on human military capability, the ones that described limited power projection, modest fleet sizes, drives that were respectable but not exceptional, and he was reading them with the fresh eyes of someone who now had a data point that contradicted almost every line. 31 ships pre-positioned. Fold drives fast enough to cover 40 light-years in 6 hours. A flagship that his registry had tried to classify as a mobile installation. Stealth signatures they hadn't detected until the ships were already in system. He called his intelligence liaison, a careful analyst named Drev Suthari, who answered looking like someone who had already heard the broad outlines and was bracing for specifics. Our files, Vaskai said, describe human military capability as mid-tier, regionally significant but not a power projection force. That was the assessment, yes, Suthari said. When was it compiled? A pause. The most recent comprehensive update was 4 years ago, sir. 4 years. There were supplemental notes. Supplemental notes, Vaskai said, did not mention that they had pre-positioned 2 response groups along our most probable approach corridors, analyst Suthari. Supplemental notes did not mention fold drive technology that contradicts every performance estimate in our registry. Supplemental notes did not mention that their flagship is large enough that our sensors initially classified it as a structure. Suthari was quiet. What else? Vaskai said, with the very controlled energy of a being choosing each word deliberately. Do our 4-year-old supplemental notes not mention? What followed was a conversation that Suthari would later describe to colleagues as the most educational 40 minutes of his career, in the way that certain very cold swimming experiences are educational. He pulled every file on human military development from the past decade. He cross-referenced observed ship movements with logged fold signatures. He looked at the border conflict with the Keth Collective, the one the Dominion had observed from a distance and noted as local territorial dispute monitor. With fresh analytical eyes, the Keth Collective, it turned out, had gone into that conflict with a fleet that outmassed the humans 3-1. The conflict had lasted 9 months. The Keth had sued for terms. There were, buried in a supplemental note from 3 years ago, some observations about human tactical adaptability that the original analyst had flagged as interesting but inconclusive. Suthari read them now with the very different perspective of someone who had just watched Fleet Commander Vaskai's 17 ships get politely escorted out of a system by 31 vessels that had apparently been waiting in the dark like a very large, very patient ambush predator. Sir, he said finally, I think we may have made some categorical errors. Write me a new assessment, Vaskai said. Everything. Drives, fleet size, tactical doctrine, strategic depth, the works. I want it complete, I want it honest, and I want it on High Admiral Koss's desk before I arrive to explain my afternoon. He closed the channel, leaned back and looked at the star field outside the Unbroken Mandate's forward viewport. Somewhere in that direction, 60-something light-years away, a mining colony was humming along, drilling holes in a moon, processing moderately useful minerals, and drinking tea, a trap. 14 months old, perfectly maintained, activated without a single shot fired, collapsed without a single casualty, and ended with a polite offer of hot beverages. Vaskai had commanded warships for 20 years. He had fought 7 engagements, participated in 4 punitive actions, and supervised 9 forced surrenders. He understood force. He understood leverage and threat and the mathematics of overwhelming power. He was not certain he understood humans yet, but he was, for the first time in a very long career, quite interested in figuring it out. Back on Crestfall Station, Rufus Achterberg eventually went back to work because the ore wasn't going to sort itself and the third moon's excavation schedule was already 2 days behind. Yolanda Ferris finished her tea, wrote a brief operational report to Kepler Command, and sent a note to the hydroponics bay requesting that her grandmother's tea plants be given additional nutrients because they had earned it. The unconditional argument and its 30 companions held position at the outer system for exactly 72 hours, then folded away in quiet formation, returning to coordinates that did not appear on any Dominion chart, waiting, patient and invisible, for the next time someone looked at a human colony and saw something small and undefended. They always came back, these empires. They always thought the math was simple. The math, it turned out, had footnotes,